Guys, welcome back to my channel. This week I want to talk about the idea that writers need to read more. So recently I was listening to a writing podcast when the interviewee stated that she read 300 books last year, and that wasn't even including rereads. Now, when the interviewer asked her how she did that, the interviewee said, "Well, I don't watch TV." Now, I rarely watch TV, and no way did I read 300 books last year. In fact, I only read a pitiful 38 books last year, and trust me, I so did not want to tell you that. This score of 38 books last year was actually particularly annoying or embarrassing or disappointing because at the start of last year, I made a promise to myself that I would read at least 50 books that year. But secretly inside, I actually wanted to read 80 books a year because that's how many books Stephen King reads a year, and I love Stephen King. Now, back to the whole 300 books thing. I just find that completely incomprehensible. I mean, of course, I don't know what kind of books she's reading. Maybe she's reading 300 Mills and Boon books a year. I don't know. But the whole idea that someone could dedicate that much time to reading kind of blows my mind. Now, the reason why I find that 300 so crazy in comparison to my 38 is because personally, I feel like all I do is read and write and talk about reading and writing. Now, it would be really easy for me to rationalize this volume by claiming that I'm a really slow reader or that I spent most of last year writing rather than reading. But I kind of feel like maybe that's just an excuse or some kind of denial. So when I was sort of questioning myself, why did I only read 38 books last year? I kind of came up with two possible answers. One was that I only read at night before I go to bed, and often because I'm so freaking tired, I'm only reading 1 or 2 pages before I crash out. Another potential reason why is because I choose to do other things than read sometimes. Now, I know I am not alone on this front. In fact, it's pretty reasonable to say that most writers need to read more. Now, I have talked quite extensively in the past about why writers need to read more. This sort of idea pops up in a lot of my videos and my blogs over on my website. But for the sake of argument, I'll just rehash some of the points right now. So reading more helps improve your vocabulary. It improves your mental recall. It also improves your brain function, and it prevents the onset of Alzheimer's. Now, you'll notice that all of those things are health benefits to reading. They're the way reading actually impacts your body. I didn't even list the ways that it improves your writing and your creative practice. Now, obviously, if you read more, you are being trained how to create character, how to write really interesting plots, how narrative drive works, how setting works, how dialogue works, how freaking writing a book works. Basically, reading books shows you how to write books. Shocking. Okay, so now you know why reading is important, as if you needed a reminder. So let's get into the how. How the heck do you read more? Now, I actually do have some pretty unique tips, and maybe you haven't heard of these before, but one of the best ways to increase your reading, to get more reading done, is to read with a pen or a pencil in hand. So I want you to think back to when you were first learning how to read and how you would underline each line with your finger as you were sounding out the words and as you were reading your storybook. If you yourself didn't do this, chances are your parent or guardian did when they were reading aloud to you or as they were trying to teach you to read. Okay? You need to go back to this method. The thing is, when you trace each sentence with your finger or with a pencil or pen, you actually read 75% faster. Why? Because your eye is naturally trained to follow movement. So your eye is following the movement of the pen, it's being more alert, And on a really basic level, it's taking the pressure off your eyeball to figure out for itself where it needs to go. You might think that that's not a big deal, but turns out it actually is. This method also works if you want to hold a piece of paper or a card up and then you just move that card down the page as you're reading. Another thing you can do if you want to read more, or at least read faster, you need to stop doing sub-vocalization. What's sub-vocalization? This is when you read text in your head as if you were reading aloud. So rather than saying every word in your head, experiment with allowing your eyes to run over the lines and for your brain to connect those words together in order to create meaning. For example, if you see the sentence, or the phrase I should say, "see you later," you don't need to actively say that in your head in order to have cognitive understanding. Because you have heard and seen this phrase so many times, it's actually very easy for your eye to just glaze over it and for your brain to instantly understand the meaning of what this phrase is communicating. Now, the only thing I have to say about subvocalization and using a pen or your finger over the lines in order to read faster. The only problem with that is it depends on what you're trying to do with your reading. These first two tips help you consume a book much faster than you ordinarily would. But you need to consider, am I reading this book because I need to get information out of it? Let's say you're reading a nonfiction book about health because there's something you're trying to fix in your body, or you're reading a time management book because you want to improve the way you manage your time. If that's the case, you probably want to read those books pretty quickly because you want to apply the advice in your life as soon as possible. But if you're reading fiction books with the intention of improving your own writing, then taking on these kind of speed reading tactics could actually be detrimental, because you need to read the fiction and you need to be paying attention on a sentence level to how the author is constructing the novel, the character, the dialogue, the setting, the blah, 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 whatever it is you're focusing on. And if you're speed reading, chances are you're going to miss the nuance that the author has very painstakingly created in that novel. So again, you just need to consider what kind of book you're reading and why you're reading it, what you're trying to get out of this experience. Now, this tip may seem a little bit obvious, but I have to admit I'm super guilty of not doing this, and that's taking a book with you everywhere. As you well know, I am sure there are so many little tiny gaps in our day, and sometimes our days don't go according to our plans and things are thrown off course. And when this happens, sometimes we're met with 10 or 15-minute gaps of waiting or doing something we hadn't expected doing, and it's kind of this weird pocket of time. But if you have a book with you, guess what? You can crack that sucker out and you can get a couple of pages read. When you have a book on hand, you can dip into that narrative whenever you find yourself in those idle moments. And let's be honest, this is a way better practice to get into than looking at your phone. In fact, there is this really fantastic company, I'll link it in the card below, in the description below, and this company creates little books that are the size of your phone. And some of the books they publish are classics, some are actually contemporary works too. And these books are the height and width of your phone. So again, you can just literally carry it around in your pocket. Another tip I personally recommend, and this won't work for everybody, but it will work for some, I'm sure, if you give it a try, and that is to read more than one book at a time. Now, this tip may seem counterintuitive. You may think it might be far better to just read one book at a time, to focus on that book, to get through it, and to move on to the next one. But me personally, I prefer to read multiple books at any one time because you never really know what mood you're going to be in for. Okay, so here's an example. I was recently reading a zombie apocalypse novel, and I freaking hate zombies. But I had to read this novel, ironically, as part of my research, but that's a whole discussion. Anyway, I couldn't read that novel at night time when I was home alone in the house. My partner was out working and it just like totally freaked me out and I couldn't read the zombie book. But fortunately, I had like 3 other books on the go, so I just read one of those instead. So often, but not always, I'll be reading one poetry book, one nonfiction book, one fiction book, or sometimes multiple fiction books, and maybe even a memoir. Now, this is not a perfect strategy. I just read what I want to read when I'm reading it. But the whole idea is that if you have multiple books going at one time, there's always going to be something that you kind of feel like reading. Now, the final tip I have for reading more is maybe not going to land with everybody, and I feel a little bit like I'm being a bit disingenuous because I myself don't do this, but I do recommend. Can I recommend something I don't do? Anyway, here's a tip for you to consider, and you can make up your own mind, and that is to listen to audiobooks. Oh, finally, I got the tip out. Like I said, I am yet to dip my feet into the audiobook land, but one of the best things about audiobooks, and now this is pretty obvious, is that the book is mobile. You can listen to the story while you're doing other stuff. You don't have to be sitting on the couch or reading in bed in order to get your reading done. You can listen to the audiobook while you're exercising, while you're cleaning the house, while you're doing all the stuff. Now, I know that some people don't consider listening to audiobooks the same as reading a book. I'm not going to get into that discussion because I don't really care. But of course, I do believe that listening to audiobooks is just one way to plow through your TBR list that much quicker. In light of the fact that I only read 38 books last year, I decided to set a very achievable goal this year of reading 40 books. Now, I have to say, we are currently, well, by the time this goes up live, we'll be 14 weeks into the year, I believe. And so far, I think I have read 15 books. 14 books. Is that right? Yeah. So I've read 14 books so far this year. So far, that's 1 book a year. So I am easily on track to read 50 books by the end of this year. So there you have it, guys. Those are my quick tips on how to get some more reading done, because let's be honest, most writers need to read more. I know I do. So if you have any tips of your own on how you get more reading done, I'd really love it if you could share it below. Now, one tip I didn't actually include in that list, and it's not in the blog, is that I've now started reading in the morning, and that has actually been really good as a way to get through my TBR list. Because as I mentioned at the start of this video, I often read at night before I go to bed, and so often I'm exhausted and I'm only reading 1 or 2 pages, but I am a morning person. So now when I get up in the morning, I do my meditation, and then I read for 20 minutes or maybe an hour, and then take my dog for a walk. But this one simple change has actually been such a supportive and effective way to chew through my TBR list. So if you have an established morning routines, I know I recently did a video on that, and you want to increase how much you're reading, maybe consider adding some reading time to your morning routine. If you would like some more writing advice, you can head over to my website, taraeats.com. I have over 150 writing blogs on the website, so enjoy. While you're there, you can also sign up for my newsletter, because when you do, I'll send you a downloadable cheat sheet called the 7 Ways to Stay Motivated as a Writer. And if you're looking for a book to add to your TBR list because you're reading so much more right now, please consider grabbing a copy of my mystery novel, Every Time He Dies. It's available everywhere and currently holding 4.83 stars on Goodreads. Thank you so much for watching again this week, guys. I'm really glad that you're here and that you show up and watch these videos. It means a lot to me. It takes a lot of time to make these videos, so I appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again next week. And now, go do some writing.